topic, and I think it's a great topic to kick off the theme of this year's Social Science Speaker Series. So today's speaker is, would probably qualify as an expert in mental health, and definitely in the education of mental health and mental health awareness. So this is Trix Van Egmond. She is a public educator with the Canadian Mental Health Association, and she's been doing this since 1999, which is a long time. And she goes all over to all different venues, probably about 100 or so talks a year, and she's absolutely great, and I know this firsthand because she came to teach a lesson in my class on health psychology. And so what I would like to do in the interest of time is to give her as much as possible, and so please help me welcome Trix Van Egmond.
Thank you, everyone. I have to explain first of all my name. Does anybody here have Dutch ancestry? Okay, yeah, we do. We have probably 10% or so there. Dutch people tend to spit when they talk. So first of all, I apologize to the front row. I'm hopefully far enough away that you don't get any of those. But my parents are from Holland. And so in Holland, Patricia tends to become Trix with a and part of their swears. Well, that was the beginning of a bad swear, but nevertheless, you've got that thing inside of a phlegm ball inside your mouth that is a part of my name. And so I've always been called Trix. I'm 53 years old. I was called Trix from the beginning. Certainly there's been times when it's been quite problematic. There's people who tell me that they had dogs when they were kids that were named Trixie. Of course, there's a rabbit. Tricks are for kids. And then there's the much more lewd, do you do any tricks? Haha, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, which, you know, maybe in my 20s, but haven't heard that one for a very, very, very long time. So, and there's always a dancer somewhere around named Trixie, so nevertheless. I keep it because I identify with it, but it's also something that a lot of people remember. So, as Anjani said, I've been at CMHA since 1999. So I do these kinds of workshops or these speaks or smaller group presentations, whether it be on stress or whether it be on suicide prevention, and everything in between, sort of, you know, depression in men, bipolar disorder, not just a bad day, what's post-traumatic stress disorder, all that kind of stuff. I do them free, and I do them as a result of United Way funding. I know that Fanshawe College does many different campaigns for United Way, and public education about mental health, about mental illness, about all of those subjects that I mentioned is not paid for by any level of government. It's paid for by the United Way. So if you're looking for that kind of stuff, it's free, it's around. So as the slide behind me says, I'm talking about Stop the Stigma, Myths and Truths about Mental Illness. So in this first, you may have seen me go around for several of the different, I'll put some YouTube videos that are up. And by the way, I'm trying to stay still, but I don't usually. And I know that there's this camera here, so I'm trying to stay still, but if I look uncomfortable, it's because I'm probably about to explode. So, this picture is fairly typical for some of the language that we'll sometimes see. So I believe it's visible from throughout the room. And it says, I'm dealing with depression. Stupid names don't help. And ripped across the piece of paper indicating his mouth says nutter. There's all kinds of terms, words that are used out there, and certainly that's certainly a large part of stigma. Why would we focus on stigma? I can't see this. I gotta go back for a second. Why focus on stigma? Because I can't see my slides up there. So the stigma that often surrounds mental health problems and mental illnesses keep many people from accessing the services that they need, not only to deal with the problem, but also from preventing it from getting worse, from preventing it from causing prisoners in their life, taking prisoners not only of relationships that they have, but of aspects of their life. In fact, most people living with a mental illness say that dealing with the stigma was worse than dealing with the mental illness. What we certainly know is that young people are even at higher rates of dealing with mental illnesses. So stigma is even worse then, because if it hits 1 in 4 of you, and in fact, I'd like to do this for a moment, I have something for 1 in 4 of you. So if you're person number 1, 2, 3, 4 gets to take a thing from the bag, okay? So there's 2 of these bags going around the room, so number 4 gets it. 1, 2, 3, 4. So pass the bag until the 4th person gets it, and you take it out. Does that make sense? You would have, yeah, we got one there. Because 1 in 4 of you in your age group will experience a mental illness, or is presently experiencing one, or has already experienced one in your life. That's 25% of us. That is more than any other set of illnesses around. That's, if we start adding up all the cancers, all the, Parkinson's disease, all of the other types of conditions, whether they be childhood onset, adolescent onset, or adult, 1 in 4 of us is more than any other set of conditions. So these balls represent, again, 1 in 4 of us have a mental health problem, and I'm saying as a euphemism for a mental illness right now. And as for all ages, including your grandparents, including your younger brothers and sisters and your parents, it's 1 in 5 of us. Not much different. One of the aspects of my family is I'm 1 out of 8 kids. And so that means that between nieces, nephews, brothers and sisters, siblings, their in-laws, their partners, etc. We have a core family of about 30 of us. So that means that in that statistic of 1 in 5 of us, about 6 of us would have a mental illness. Absolutely true. Actually, I would say it's slightly higher. But I think that's also because I'm near the end of the age, and so I'm the younger. So the more years you live, the more likely it's going to happen. So this is, why am I talking about stigma? Certainly, 1 in 4 of you will have that, and then many of us will not actually access care. Unlike for other health conditions, there's only 1 in 3 of us, so the balls are still going around, but those of you who do have a ball, put your hand up in the air. Okay. So the stats say that only 1 in 3 of you will actually access help, even though you know things are wrong. Why? Most times because we're ashamed. It could be that we don't even know. Finding the right service, as that first bullet says, there can be a real challenge. You don't know where to go or what to do. Yet there are tons of mental health services out there, but they're hard to find. Sometimes we don't recognize that we have a problem, or even that it's something that anybody can help with. We think that it's, well, I just have to try harder. Or everybody worries about stuff. It can't be that bad. It's a normal sort of emotion. And by the way, the short one on that I'd say is if it interferes with any aspect of your life, it needs assistance. Okay? If it interferes, that's how you can tell. Yes, 100 of us might all experience the same levels of pressure, and only 20 of us might find that that is so high that it screws us up from sleeping, from being able to do things, from being able perhaps to eat, being able to physically feel well, etc. It interferes with our everyday life. That is when it's probably an indication of a mental illness. Okay? Additionally, some of us are just too ashamed to actually acknowledge the problem. We think that somehow or other it's our fault. We're going to be one of those people, quite frankly, that the movies will tell us do all kinds of nasty things, that are somehow lazy, that are uninspired, that are people that just don't pull their socks up. 46% of people believe that mental illnesses are an excuse for bad behavior. You're just blaming it on your mental illness. You're saying that I have bipolar disorder when really you don't. You're just too addicted to drama to actually want to do something about that. Or you've got your whole body clock turned around and you're not making the effort to do anything about that. We also know that in any given year, 1 in 5 people in Canada that experience a mental health problem, it's going to cost the economy $50 billion in excess of. That's huge. Let me talk about the myths of mental illness for a moment, so that we sort of contextualize some of these things. So the very first one, of course, is that people with mental illnesses are violent and dangerous. And as I mentioned, any movie that wants to entertain you or scare you usually gives a person in the movie a mental illness. Which mental illness, by the way?
Schizophrenia?
Almost always schizophrenia. Yeah. Lately, we've seen a little bit of borderline personality disorder or the Dexter syndrome of antisocial personality disorder, which of course it's changed in the last DSM, that sort of stuff. But nevertheless, almost always schizophrenia. The facts are 96% of all violent crimes, and this is actually a United States statistic, all violent crimes are done by people without mental illnesses. Without mental illnesses. I'm not saying we don't still hear those very high-profile things. So, for example, there was a man on a bus that many of you may have heard of that took the head off of a fellow passenger. This was about 6 or 7 years ago on a Greyhound bus in the Winnipeg area. Okay, so first of all, there's one murder, by the way, and we have about 70 murders a year in Ontario. I think in London we're up to around a dozen or so, or actually a little less than a dozen. But nevertheless, and if we also compare that with suicide rates, we have 300 people a month every year for the last 30 years dying by suicide in Canada. But boy, do we remember this case. Boy, do we remember this case. Anyways, let me contextualize that case, because of course, for many of us, it's proof that people with mental illnesses are violent and dangerous. That case was terrible in the sense that the man, his name was Vincent, was put on a bus. He was sick and actively psychotic. And so that means that he was seeing things, hearing things, smelling, tasting, feeling things that were not real, and he could not tell. And he was experiencing delusions, which are beliefs. The other ones are hallucinations when they're in your senses. So he's experiencing delusions as well. And some of those delusions would interact with the hallucinations. So he believed this person sitting beside him on the bus ultimately was an alien, and that he was going to protect the world from an invasion by killing this person. A very defensive kind of, I can't let this happen to mankind. He had been sick for months before this happened. He was put on a bus in, I think it was 4 different communities, and sent along. Move along, because he's acting funny. He's acting weird. Don't want you in our town. So authorities put him on a bus and moved him on. I think that what happened, where the death of the fellow passenger on the bus was entirely predictable, entirely preventable. We saw a man, in a sense, having a heart attack, and we put him on a bus and told him to go to another town, made him go to another town. Would we do that for a heart attack? No. We would access medical care for that person who's having a physical heart attack. Well, he's having a psychotic event in front of you. Not okay. Not okay at all. And I think that's a lot of what we need to do with stigma, is to remember that those sorts of equations work. It is a physical illness. Yes, it's a mental illness that is also a physical illness. It shows, it manifests itself in many, many different ways. Predictable ways, but still many, many different ways. And we need to know more about that in order to identify when it's an illness, not an idiot being an idiot. So for example, I mentioned the 96% of violent acts are done by people without mental illnesses. What's a better predictor of violence? Who gets in a fight in the bar at night?
Drunks.
The drunk. And what else?
Drunks, intoxicated people, people who go there with the sole purpose to cause harm to one another.
People with an attitude problem is what's the last one. So the
Yes.
first one is like what you're saying there, drugs, substances, alcohol. First and foremost, that's one. There's another.
They tend to be younger.
They do tend to be younger, but that's not usually an indicator by itself. Family history. That's the next best indicator. Okay? You know, a family that solves things with violence, well, that's what we learn. So those are much better indicators. They're the top two indicators for violence. Substance abuse and family history. And that may be part of where the latter point where he said about coming with an axe to grind, an attitude, wanting to, because that perhaps is part of the learning that you've got otherwise. So it's just not true. In fact, with that first myth, more likely to be the victim of violence. My sister, one of my sisters struggles with a mental illness. I remember watching my father to repeatedly slap her across the face as a teenager. We had never gotten hit in anger at home. And occasionally, I'm 53, so we got spanked, right? And sometimes, you know, and you saw it coming a mile away. You knew that, you know, you just push that button a little bit more, tease your brother a little bit more, sit on him, whatever, beat the crap out of him, you're gonna get punished. And you knew, and it was like, it never hurt, quite frankly. It was my mom doing it, and it would hurt her too much, and so it'd be like this little, and you cry, your head off. But we never got hit, and that was except for those spankings occasionally. I remember watching my dad repeatedly hit my sibling across the face, so frustrated with the signs of her depression. He didn't know she had depression. She didn't know she had depression. It would take another 25 years before she found out that she had depression. She had bipolar type 2, which is mostly depressed and occasionally hypomanic. Many of us may not know what I'm even talking about there. That's part of our mental health literacy in order to increase that. But there was 10 of us that were in that room watching this happen and having no idea what to say. And that is much more likely to happen, is people with mental illnesses are more often the victims of violence. You often don't have the physical resources as well as the emotional and mental resources not to be in those situations. So for example, one of the next myths gets to poor or less intelligent. Did you know the poverty one? There immediately. So poor people don't have any higher rates of mental illness than rich people do. In fact, rich people have slightly higher rates, but not enough to be clinically significant. Much like this little factoid I'll give you. How many of you in this room are left-handed? Okay. So, you are slightly more likely to die by suicide. Okay? Not enough to be clinically significant. Okay? It's not relevant. You don't look at a left-handed person and say, oh my gosh, are you okay? You know? It's hard not to live left-handed, but nevertheless, you don't want to invite those sorts of things. All the scissors and stuff that are made for right-handed people. Anyway, so similarly, we do know that rich people have slightly higher rates of mental illness, but it's not enough, again, to be clinically significant. The opposite, though, is a commonly held belief. Poor people have higher rates of mental illness. Not true. But we do know the opposite is true. Live with a mental illness, you are likely to experience poverty. So it's the opposite. The chicken or the egg, in this one we know what causes the poverty. Living with a mental illness causes the poverty. By far the largest people who are on ODSP or on CPP disability why they're disabled is because of mental illnesses, not because of other physical illnesses. So that first one with being victims of violence, I have resources. I am a middle income earner with credit. If I'm in a dangerous situation, my father's slapping me or whatever that sort of thing is, it's a different situation as a teenager, you may not have those resources that I have right now, I can use my credit card and get out of there. I have resources. I also have the internal resources that say, this isn't happening to me, this is wrong, versus being in a situation where, well, maybe I deserve it. Maybe, this is what should happen to someone like me, because that's often what people with mental illnesses will feel. The next myth up there, or that attached to the poverty one, gets to less intelligent. We know at least average to above average intelligence. That doesn't mean wiliness, it doesn't mean manipulativeness. That's not how you measure intelligence. Intelligence is made up primarily of memory and attentional capacity, the two put together with the different types of memory. Anyway, so it's just not true. Average to above average. However, again, some of the meds that you might take may lead you to believe that somebody has a mental illness. So if they talk with a lack of affect, and by that I mean emotion in their voice and things like that, or slower paced, and you don't see a lot of facial movement or things like that, we'll sometimes think that somebody has an intellectual disability. It's got nothing to do with it. It's got nothing to do with it. That's called affect. It's something else. So it certainly is just simply not true. The next myth, mental illness is caused by personal weakness. I'm certainly not someone who believes it's a get out of jail free card. I don't get to say, hey, I have depression. I am not responsible for my behavior. Or I have borderline personality disorder. I'm not responsible for what goes on by any means. Just like it doesn't work for my mom who has type 2 diabetic, and she would say, I have diabetes. No wonder I'm fainting. And no wonder, and all this sort of stuff. And perhaps what she would do is she would take the insulin once a day, or actually twice a day, but she would also not eat until supper time, and then she'd eat lemon meringue pie. Hello, Mom. You don't get to say, well, I'm diabetic. No wonder I'm still sick. No, you have a responsibility to take care of yourself as well. And that means the basics. So I mean, eating 3 times a day, 3 to 5 times a day, the quality of overeating, dealing with sleep, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying it's absolutely not caused by personal weakness, but it can be exacerbated by our personal choices. So I choose to drink a lot. Well, quite frankly, alcohol is a depressant. That also brings down your frontal lobes. So it makes you depressed and impulsive. Recipe for stupid. Like that's, and then if I've already got a depressive illness, I'm kind of throwing gas on a fire. That is my condition. I'm throwing more depressant on top of my experience of depression. So certainly there's many different choices, just like the ones that we have for physical illnesses that can make our mental illness worse, but it's not caused by those choices. It is a genetic predisposition. So how many of us know if we have a mom, dad, or sibling with depression? Okay. How many of us know that for generalized anxiety disorder? How many of us know that for bipolar disorder? Okay, good. How many of us know that for cancer? Okay, good. For heart disease? Excellent. Okay. The reason I say that is because it should be exactly like those things. It's not a promise because of some of the people that put up their hands that they have cancer in their history, in their family history, or depression, or generalized anxiety disorder. It's not a promise that you're going to get it if your biological family, your close biological family has it, but it's a higher possibility. It's definitely a higher possibility. As soon as you have one parent with depression, which overall is, women, it's about 20% of women will have depression, and about 12 to 15% of men will have depression in their lifetimes. So if you have one biological parent with depression, you have about a 30% chance, despite your gender, of developing depression. You should know that. You should know that for all mental illnesses, and certainly for physical illnesses as well. It's part of knowing your genetic makeup, knowing what you're much more likely to experience, and therefore knowing the signs. They're illnesses. The earlier that we deal with them, the better. People who need or use medication for a mental illness are weak and just aren't trying hard enough. I get that. I hear that a lot. There'll be people that will, or they're not taking their meds, and therefore somehow or other, it's very problematic. The medications for mental illnesses are problematic to begin with. For one, they take like 4 to 8 weeks just to see if they work. And then you might have had all these other physical problems in the meantime, and so you have to get off that med, but you can't just cold turkey it. You got to wait a little while until you get off of it. And then you can add the next one. And in the meantime, you have all the distress, and you have the cognitive fogging, and you have, you know, I don't know, maybe shingles broke out, and you've got incredible fatigue, and you can't think, and life is going on, right? So many of the medications for mental illnesses are tough and complicated. And in a sense, they should be. They're working on your brain, which controls all of your systems. They aren't simply working, for example, like insulin on your pancreas. They aren't simply working, even in something like rheumatoid arthritis, on your joints. I mean, that's still a big system, but it's still only one system. It's not working on your ability to think, your physicality, your ability to process information, your ability to express yourself, your ability to actually feel emotion. Those are just small aspects of it, of what the medications are dealing with. So they are complex. They're very complex. But just using a medication doesn't somehow mean that you're not trying hard enough. And I think, quite frankly, if we said that for other things, I suggest that later on, that if we said that for things like heart disease, you know, the fact that you use that high blood pressure medication means that you're just not trying hard enough, you know? You're just weak. It may not mean, I mean, over time, you might actually get better at managing your heart health, and you may wean yourself off that medication, etc. Lipitor is a fairly common one. But you might not, ever. You might have that medication for the rest of your life, and that is somehow not a failing of you. It's something that you need, in the same way that you may need your insulin. The last myth is that mental illness is a single rare disorder. What is the manual that we use? I briefly referred to it earlier, that we use to diagnose mental illnesses. Yeah, DSM. Does not stand for the dumb and stupid manual, although I've heard that. And to some degree, there's some aspects of it that are a little bit iffy. It stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and we're on the 5th revision. It came out in May 2014. It's the Bible. It's the psychiatrist's Bible. It's used in order to diagnose mental illnesses. It's not that there's not some things that are pretty iffy in there. There are some things that are a little bit iffy, but we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't mean that everything in there is somehow illegitimate now. Do know that the DSM, part of what happens with the DSM is that if you do not have your illness listed in there, then you are not able to access various medical systems. So for example, at one point when they were looking at this last revision for the DSM, they were looking at removing antisocial personality disorder. But they knew that as soon as they removed antisocial personality disorder from the DSM, thousands upon thousands and thousands of people lost their medical care, because it's got to be in there in order to get paid medical care. Okay? And that's especially important in the US. And they knew that the definition in DSM-4 was wrong for antisocial personality disorder. But just removing it suddenly disenfranchises a whole bunch of people. So they worked it, sort of thing. So do know that there are, that's an additional factor. Well, homosexuality was in the DSM as a mental disorder up until 1975. So that says, gee, really? Come on, that's stupid. And so it's certainly something that is a little bit of a political document, but there's many, many mental illnesses in there. Does anybody have any idea about how many are in the DSM? About 800. About 800. And then there's this great NOS category. Does anybody know what that one stands for?
Not otherwise specified.
Yes. Not otherwise specified. So it's like walks like a chicken, talks like a chicken. It's probably a chicken, but we don't really know what kind of a chicken. It's a not otherwise specified chicken. So, I mean, that's a whole bucket as well. So it's certainly not a single rare disorder, yet many of our newspaper articles will often refer to it that way. Mentally ill man attacks woman. I'm waiting for the day that says diabetic attacks mother, you know, arthritic trips man, sort of stuff. You know, like, yeah, something, you know, that says that. Certainly, if it is the condition itself that is mediating the behavior, then perhaps that's relevant. But often it's not the condition itself that's mediating that particular response. But it is an easy kicking boy, very easy. These are all people who are open about their experiences with mental illnesses. These are famous people with mental illnesses that say, I'm in the club, or I have been in the club, or I continue to struggle in that particular club. I think that on these, we'll often find people that are heroes to us, that remind us that it's okay, that I can talk to my 84-year-old mother, my cheap Dutch mother. She's dead now, so it's kind of feels bad to say that, but nevertheless, incredibly cheap. She knew it too, proud of it. And I remember talking to Mom actually on this second slide about a person that's there, because my mom was demonstrating many of the signs of depression. And she's like, no, it couldn't be, not me. I mean, I'm well off, I've got, my health, I've got a family that's good for me, I've got a home. It couldn't be. Someone like me, not at all. And like, well, Mom, it's no shame. I mean, even the Queen. And my mom comes back with, couldn't be. She's the richest woman in the world. Yeah, well, if anything, that says that she should be able to access the best diagnostic tools, the best care, the best treatment possible, and she's still in the club too, Mom. It's not your fault. It happens. It happens to many people. It happens to people we admire, to people that we think are kind of idiots, people that we, all kinds of different people. I often, I'll put these lists up and suggest that you look for people on there that if you're talking to your 12-year-old cousin, if you're talking to your 84-year-old mother, you're talking to your 20-year-old sister, you're talking to your, boyfriend, etc. They may see people that are athletes, that are musicians, that are actors, etc., that are all open about their experiences with mental illnesses. We're not talking about people that are what I'll say, acting odd. So for example, Michael Jackson is not on here. And he certainly had a number of odd public behaviors that led people to believe that he was somebody with a mental illness. We do not know that. He never said, I am in that club. Certainly, as a result, I'm not going to put him up on something like this. These are people who say, I'm in that club. Stigma. Certainly, by the way, I'm also in that club. I'm somebody who lives with clinical depression. Haven't been symptomatic for quite some time, but I mentioned that. I'll get back in the light for a second. I mention that because sometimes you look at people and go, oh, you can tell. You can just look at somebody and tell if they're depressed, right? You can, whether it's you look them in the eyes or whatever, this sort of stuff, or the way that they're behaving or that kind of stuff. We can't tell. We call it the fake it till you make it, or sometimes I call it the lipstick approach. You put on your lipstick, well, it's not quite my dressing up clothes, but you put on your dressed up clothes and you say, I'm fine. And what does fine stand for? Capital F, capital I, capital N, capital E. Okay, I didn't hear it, but I'm from the Windsor area. I have a bit of a trash mouth, so I'm not going to use the trash completely, but capital F for fine stands for freaked out, we'll go with. Put in your own, whatever you want to call it. Insecure, neurotic, and emotional. I'm fine, I'm fine. We can all fake it. It doesn't mean you're fine. And we can do that in a bunch of different ways. So, stigma, again, we believe that there's a historic opportunity now. I'm noticing the last 10 years especially that people are willing to say, this is not something wrong with me. This is something that I have. This is an experience. This is an illness. This is not a personality failing. We can and must defeat the stigma that's blighted people's attitudes for far too long and has fed the discrimination. I'm going to come back to discrimination a little bit later on because that's what it is. Stigma, is anybody here Catholic? Okay, where does the word stigma come from? Those things, they're called what? Stigmata, which meant marks of shame. And that people who were crucified, and not everybody who died, or I'm sorry, not everybody who was crucified died. Many lived through the crucifixion. And so you were brought down and you had these marks of shame that told everyone you were a criminal. Stigma means a mark of shame. What I'm suggesting, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, it's more than shame, it's discrimination. So, struck down. I want to show you this video because I think that it demonstrates some of the things that we do to people when they're experiencing stigma. Or, I'm sorry, when they're experiencing mental illnesses.
Is he okay?
Come on, look at him. He's fine. He's not even bleeding.
Probably just doesn't want to go to work.
And then they leave them. Right? Just leave them there. Let me just get rid of this for a second. So what can we do about stigma? First of all, think about our language. Think about the types of phrases that we use. A person first with mental illness, not a schizophrenic, not a mentally ill person, not a a bipolar. We use lots of terms, and I don't think that we have to be so politically correct, but I think that we have to be a little bit sensitive to some of those terms. So for example, we might mean that something's funny, and we say things like, that's nuts, that's crazy, that's etc. And by itself, that doesn't necessarily mean that, but you also get terms, and I hear it a lot in high schools, that's mental. Stop being mental. What? What does that mean? Huh? Thinks it's hilarious, but we all say that's insane. So say, that's hilarious. Next one. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He or she experienced anorexia, not that they are anorexic. When we use that ick at the end, like I said, for schizophrenia, etc., a person that lives with schizophrenia, we define people by their illness. We say that that's why they're behaving the way they are. They are everything about them is that illness. We are so much more than our illness is. I'm a mother of two. Yes, I've heard people call me a depressive. Yeah, well, that's one aspect of me. I'm an avid hiker. I swim 90 lengths 3-4 times a week. I'm a former lifeguard. I'm a former teacher. I'm a public educator. I'm really into indie music, whatever, all that sort of stuff. I'm so much more than just being a person with depression. And that's what depressive certainly implies. This one has touched a lot of people this week. We put this one on our Facebook. And we have over 12,000 shares, or I'm sorry, over 12,000 hits and over 100 shares on this one. It's touched a lot of people. If you're somebody who's left behind after suicide, the stigma and the shame and the isolation that you experience as a result of your relative dying by suicide, using language like committed. When's the only other time you use that kind of language? Is when somebody's a criminal. They committed a murder. They committed a burglary. We don't use it for suicide. Why? Why? It's certainly not a crime. It's a tragedy. It's not a crime. So think about language. Another thing is participate in awareness events. We just did the Terry Fox run a couple days ago and stuff like that, and that's wonderful. And by the way, it's not a pissing contest. I'm not saying, ignore that versus that. Of course, this is part of a community. This is, the whole thing. So some of the events that we know of that are out there, they're in February, eating disorder awareness typically. In May, Mental Health Week, Mental Health Month. October, Mental Illness Awareness Week. There's also World Mental Health Day from the World Health Organization in October. November, Addictions Month. September, there's a lot of stuff around suicide prevention. On September 10th, it's World Suicide Prevention Day. We have things like this, Ride, Don't Hide, in June. every year. It's across Canada, which is about riding for awareness of depression. There's things about real men, real depression. There's tons. Movember also has a mental health component, not just a prostate health. Many of us don't know that it's also about men and depression. There's many, many different events and many different awareness opportunities. Keep your ears out for them. Look for a chance to participate in them. Maybe build your own. There's a thing about blue elephants, the elephant in the room, the sad elephant in the room that's done by the Mood Disorders Association of Canada. There is the ribbons of blue and purple for suicide survivors, people left behind after losing someone to suicide. Look for those things. It's not, this one is about addictions. Recovery is possible. There's lots of different things out there. Name hurtful language for what it is. So often when we're in that particular place, we don't have the emotional resources, perhaps even the cognitive resources, to respond to the language that's said to us. So I have various family members, one that's struggling with severe anxiety right now. And regularly other people will say to him about his anxiety that it's just all in your head, which I think is hilarious because of course it is all in your head, but they mean it as a diss. It's all in your head. Everybody goes through this. You just got to stop thinking about that stuff. And he doesn't have the resources to say, screw off, you know? This is just wrong. You don't need to talk to me that way. Or to be a legitimate person who can speak on his own behalf. So on behalf of his needs. So speak up on behalf of other people. Hey, not okay. You know, you don't get to say that for somebody else, whether it's your friend, whether it's a bystander. We can certainly, I mean, the language is hurtful to the person. It's also dismissive. When we say things like, well, everybody goes through that. You know, just try harder. It dismisses what you're going through. If I said that for something else, you would probably be a little bit more caring. So yeah, I broke my leg and it's hard to get back and forth to class. Well, everybody goes through that. Well, it doesn't. No. Well, not only does not everybody go through that, it doesn't dismiss it. It's still hard. It's still hard. And I could use some help. It can be bullying. It can be silencing. When we shut people up, when that language is there. And ultimately, as I mentioned, if we treat people differently as a result of their mental illness, it's discrimination. The Human Rights Code of Ontario, as well as workplaces. So say, for example, in a manic episode, I have sex on the boss's desk and I photocopy my butt and stick it all around the wall of our offices, or do something like that, and I am dismissed from my organization because of my behavior. If we can clearly, one, if they knew I had bipolar disorder and it was clear that I was getting, for most people it's taking a while before you get unwell, that I was experiencing a manic episode, or the medical research or the medical interventions that I have validate that this is a real medical condition. Just like if I'm in low blood sugar and I have blubble mouth and I interject with words that just aren't mine, I can't be fired for that. It's a real medical condition. Again, it's not a get out of jail free card though. Other things in hurtful language, if you're unsure about the language, if you're thinking, I'm not really, you know, that she said, oh, she's just so whatever, and there's a reference to it being a mental health problem. If you're unsure about the language, substitute a physical problem. You know, if somebody said that and they used the word, you know, depression versus diabetes or heart disease or whatever, all that kind of stuff, would I feel the same way? If it seems legit, fine. If it doesn't seem legit, then challenge it, quite frankly. Increase our literacy about mental illness. In this first one, I like you, start naming physical illnesses that you know of, just physical illnesses.
Cancer.
Cancer. Fibromyalgia. Parkinson's.
ADHD.
I'm sorry?
ADHD.
ADHD, that can also be under mental illness depending as a learning. MS. And multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis. Anything else? Lupus?
Tuberculosis.
I didn't even know what that one is. What is it?
Tuberculosis. It's a lung disease.
Okay, there we go. Another one I just learned. And I'm sorry, what did you just say over to the right? Rheumatoid arthritis. There's tons.
Brittle bone disease.
I'm sorry?
Brittle bone disease.
Brittle bone disease, Ferr's disease.
Anemia.
Anemia. I'm sorry? Okay, and next to you? I didn't hear the last. Crohn's disease, colitis, carpal tunnel. Okay. Chlamydia, absolutely. Yeah. Sickle cell anemia, another type of anemia. Okay. I often think about prostate cancer as just an example. I know more about prostate cancer and I don't even own a prostate. No? Gee. Now let's start naming mental illnesses. I've mentioned some. ADHD is in that kind of category.
Social anxiety disorder.
Social anxiety disorder.
Bipolar type 1.
Bipolar type 1 and bipolar type 2, and thank you for making the difference. I did refer to a family member with type 2, but lots of people don't know that there's at least two.
ADD.
ADD and ADHD, they're kind of the same. I mean, they're different faces of the same coin, but yes, a variation of it.
Schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia. Obsessive compulsive disorder. PTSD. Manic depression is another name for bipolar disorder, type 1 and type 2, but it's good to know that. That's part of our literacy, what it used to be called versus what it presently is called, and therefore some people still call it that.
Autistic spectrum.
Autistic spectrum disorder, and we can sometimes talk about Asperger's as at one end of that spectrum as well. Borderline personality disorder.
Alcoholism.
Alcoholism, and there's a number of different, like we can talk about concurrent disorders as well, where there's several there too.
Dementia.
I'm sorry?
Dementia.
Dementia, excellent. And there's lots of variations of dementia.
Bulimia.
Bulimia, anorexia. Sorry, did I just take yours there? Alzheimer's, and again, as a form of dementia as well. So again, we've got the literacy to know that there's more of that. Paranoia by itself is kind of like a sneeze. You can sneeze for a bunch of different reasons, often associated with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type 1 perhaps as well. I know you're getting ready to go.
Clinical depression.
Clinical depression. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second. Excellent, by the way. I'm glad we kept going because, and then there's specific phobias. Remember the 800 different conditions that are in the DSM. So increase our literacy. Part of that means that knowing about the names of those conditions, perhaps the signs and symptoms, the typical signs and symptoms of them, resources, right? What are some of the resources? So it's, trying to figure out what some of those things are. Because remember, 1 in 4 of us right now has a mental illness. As part of increasing, there's definitely many different options for increasing literacy. There is lots of information out there. There's lots of free events around too. We can't advertise them because we're not, I put them on Eventbrite, put it that way, or I put them through the Central Public Library because we don't have a budget as a charity for actually advertising, and the federal government, the provincial government would actually claw that back. We'd be punished if we did actually use the resources that way. So it may be that you learn more about illnesses in these particular ways. Different types for treatments for mental illnesses. Being supportive is something else that we can do to address stigma. Remember, if we can substitute a physical thing, it sometimes helps us to understand that I'm treating you differently because it's a mental health problem versus a physical health problem. I'm going to stop now because I can feel you all getting ready to go. But if you are if you are looking for this information, whether it's a copy of this PowerPoint or not, what's my name? Trix. Yes. You can find me at the local Canadian Mental Health Association. Thanks, everyone.